I'm heartened to see so many people here. So I had envisioned this as a very open kind of conversation. I'm not sure how that's going to work with so many people, but we'll figure it out. Lady and Jane will tell me what to do. I think the Holy Spirit will guide us. So I just wanted to say before we actually start and get into the conversation, 2 words about the letter, about Bishop Mark Seitz. I don't know if anybody had seen this letter, Night Will Be No More, when it came out. It was released on, I think, October 13th, which was it was the Sunday before Columbus Day. We used to be called Columbus Day, often now called Indigenous Peoples Day. Although he calls it Indigenous Peoples Day as a kind of way of saying, this is the direction that we need to be moving in. Anyway, it was released there in El Paso. Mark Seitz is the bishop of El Paso. Were people aware of this when it came out? I'm just curious. Yeah, because I found that most Catholics in the United States weren't really aware of it. Bishop Seitz isn't super prominent among the U.S. bishops. But it's to date I think their strongest statement against racism. They released an earlier pastoral letter as a body. That document had strengths and weaknesses, which we could discuss. But this is meant to be a kind of addendum to that letter in a much more specific local context that does have national ramifications. So I'll just say 2 words about the letter. I forgot to mention this, how could I forget, is that it's also especially appropriate as we approach the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, that that's really everything. In a sense, that's all you need to know. That's Seitz's answer. In a sense, I would say that's the Spirit's answer to the sin of racism. How are we going to overcome it? We look to Our Lady of Guadalupe, both what the story reveals, the possibilities that it unlocks. So it's the perfect time of year to be discussing this. So let's begin a bit. I just want to say 2 words about the context that this letter is released in. And as many people, I don't know how aware of this people are of the shifting demographics of the United States, the shifting demographics of the Catholic Church. We who are in media and journalism, we think about this a lot for business reasons. We know that our readership is, and Gabriella can speak to this as well, our readership, we've done a kind of assessment, and we found that our, largely white, Northeastern Catholics, we're a national publication, but we're aware that not everybody in the nation is participating in the conversation that the magazine hosts. And so that's a process that we've undertaken in the past year to look at ourselves critically, to look at and say, where does racism exist, even within our very small structure of the magazine? And I think that's an important thing that Bishop Seitz is calling us and the church to, which is self-examination. So that's the context that it emerges in. I forget the exact statistic, but by 2050, I think it's something like 70% of the Catholic Church in the United States will be Hispanic, and this is not something that we're 70%, yeah. So a huge by far, and this is another thing that we were speaking with the folks at CARA at Georgetown, which is the Center for Applied Research and Apostolate, and they found that the trend is in the Northeast, parishes are shrinking. Catholicism is shrinking. There's that narrative of secularization dying off, but it's the complete opposite in the Southwest. And if anybody's from Los Angeles, that is the fastest growing archdiocese in the U.S. So it's not even a question of talking about a Hispanic church. The Hispanic church is the Catholic Church in the United States. But then why doesn't the structure of the church reflect that? That's the critical context into which Seitz is entering. And so he writes this letter mainly to point this out and to say we need to begin dealing with the sin of white supremacy. He's very clear in naming it. And so I guess I thought I would ask people, and I'm not really going to give a talk, but I thought we'd just facilitate, maybe we can pass the mic, but Somebody made the comment, you made the comment earlier that white supremacy, saying that makes us uncomfortable, and should we use that word, or that phrase? I had a friend who's now a Jesuit scholastic, who challenged me on this earlier this fall and said, what are you talking about white supremacy? It's not like people are in the Ku Klux Klan and running around in hoods. And, okay, but what was the purpose of the hoods? What was the purpose of lynching? It was fear, right? To create fear. I mean, not just violence, but it was to tell Black Americans that they had to know their place in society. Otherwise, we'll kill you. White supremacy, as I read it, and I think as Seitz reads it, it says that the social order has to have white people on top and everybody else at the bottom. And everything is ordered towards that. And Seitz says anything that contributes to that or that fails to dismantle it is sinful. So even our silence, even our inaction is sinful. I think that's a radical message that we're not comfortable talking about, hearing. But it's very interesting when we watched Bishop Seitz in El Paso deliver this, I've got it here, this ceremonial copy of the letter signed by him that he gave to Milton Bravo, who's our Director of Audience Development. He gave several ceremonial copies. Ours was to the journalists in pursuit of the truth. But Seitz, as this was read, and it ends, if you've read the letter, with this very forceful conclusion, calling on President Trump to end the Remain in Mexico policy, very specific demands, and he sat there in utter peace, watching him after having celebrated Mass. It was quite powerful to watch. This was a person, a leader of the church, truly at peace, at ease with what he just said. So with that, I thought we could begin just by talking about what does the phrase white supremacy call up in us? What kinds of feelings does it provoke? Does it provoke anger, fear, hostility? So I'll leave it. How should we do this?
We could try to pass the mic around.
I thought we were going to discuss what's happening at the border.
Oh, we could talk about that too.
No, I thought this wasn't the meeting, I'm sorry. I'm not the wrong.
So, I mean, I can talk about this, yeah. So, let's see. Do you want to hear about the border? We can talk about the border.
Yes.
It's kind of a separate discussion. I mean, it's related. Well, I'll just say, I could tell the whole story, but it's going to take some time. That means I'm going to do more talking. Is that okay? Okay.
Sure.
There's a deeper story here that I'm involved in, or that we as a magazine are involved in, and that I guess everybody's involved in. It begins, you could say, the New York Times says it began in 1619. But the specific story that I'm going to tell begins over the summer. This was when there was a group that met at Notre Dame University, a group of theologians, activists, organizers, met at Notre Dame in the context of Hispanic ministry. And they formed a new group called the Latinx Catholic Leadership Coalition. And I think there's about 20 or 30 members of that group. Milton, I'm sorry that Milton's not here. He's a member of the group. But they met and said, we need to have a way of making our voices heard. These are some of the most influential people in the Catholic Academy and in activist and media circles as well. So there's somebody from America, there's somebody from Catholic News Services, there's somebody from Commonweal, as well as people from Notre Dame, Boston College, etc. And they said, we want to call attention to the issue of what's happening at the border, because people want to, as you do, people want to know. And this was, I think, in July they met. And so they were planning, well, maybe we'll meet somewhere in Arizona, maybe Texas, and we'll do some kind of action to talk about the border. And this was before the massacre at El Paso, at the Walmart on August 3rd. So when that happened, that sort of changed the plans. Dylan Corbin, who's the leader of Hope Border Institute, they're a group based in El Paso, and I think they also have a place in Nogales, Arizona, but anyway, they're primarily in El Paso. And Dylan, who was on the ground on August 3rd, and he lives in El Paso, he said we need to put everything on hold. people are wounded, people are more fearful than they've ever been, and so we sort of need to regroup here. And at the time, President Trump was also planning a visit, not to stress people even more. But it was for me, it was moving, just as a journalist, to be on a call with them, a kind of video conferencing call, and to actually see Dylan. It was indescribable, the amount of pain that was happening in that community. And so the thought was, and I'm not a member of the coalition, I'm writing a longer article about another group that's part of that coalition. It's complicated, but so that's why I was kind of there listening, just journalistically. So the thought was they needed to do something bigger. That is, what's happening in El Paso is provoked by a white supremacist ideology, right? So Patrick Crusius released a famous manifesto, which if you read it, is utterly incoherent. But it relies primarily on this issue that, or this I don't even know what you would call it, a lie, like a sinful lie, that white people are being replaced across the world, and they call this replacement theory or white genocide. So this is the stated motivation for the attack, and it's the same stuff that Trump says at every rally. Mexicans are rapists, etc. It's the same thing. It's stupid, but it has power. And so the thought was we need Catholic leaders to go to the border and to say, no, enough of this. Bishop Seitz was very supportive. Bishop Seitz, again, I don't know how much you know about him or how much you follow him, but he's constantly going back and forth between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez on the other side of the border. He's known there. He frequently does masses across the border. And it's interesting too, and I can get to this later in the story, but we followed a group of asylum seekers from Juarez into El Paso. And there are 3 bridges from Juarez into El Paso. We were in the middle of them. And so the border patrol agents are trying to provoke us, trying to bait us into responding so that they can arrest us. Not me, because I'm oppressed and I can just cover and look. Anyway, but, and they're saying, where's the bishop? I thought it was the bishop. Why isn't the bishop with you? So he's kind of known for doing this, even among Customs and Border Protection. And I think it's quite powerful. It's a good witness that he's giving. But anyway, so the thought was that there would be a large gathering, a teach-in, that ended up being called the Jornada por la Justicia, how do you translate that? Like the pilgrimage for justice, or teach-in for justice. That's right. Yeah. So it was thought to be there was going to be a teach-in, and there would be panels, and there were panels on racism, Catholic social teaching, how to organize, sort of activist-centered, nonviolent panels. About 400 people went. It was more than half of college students. It was actually really heartening to see. Anyway, so there was going to be a big teach-in. There would also be a bi-national border action, and the purpose of that was just to call attention to the racist policies that the administration is, currently still carrying out at the border. Primary among which was remain in Mexico, which I'm sorry, this is not an objective term, but it was just so stupid. It doesn't make any sense. We had some lawyers here. I was asking them about this the last Frank talk that we had. It's illegal what the administration is doing. It's against international law to deny asylum to asylum seekers. That is, we subscribe to the Geneva Conventions, et cetera, et cetera. And the international law is such that if a person is fleeing a nation, if they're fleeing violence and they're requesting asylum, they have to be heard. Their claim has to be processed. The Trump administration, under this policy, devised by the Department of Homeland Security called Remain in Mexico, it means just that. Asylum seekers will not be processed, they will not be heard, they must remain in Mexico. Even Mexican nationals who are fleeing violence in the South. We've seen over the past several weeks just how powerless the Mexican federal government is at stopping cartel violence. So people whose families are under immediate threat are not even being heard by Customs and Border Protection. They're not even being ignored, they're being threatened into silence. So it's serious problem. I mean, when we say racism, we talk about white supremacy. This is white supremacy in action. There's already a huge border wall went up starting in the 90s under the Clinton administration. And I don't know how much you know about U.S. border policy, but it was under the, it's not just a Democrat-Republican thing, although the Republicans, I hate to say, bear so much of the blame, especially the Trump administration, for what's happening now. And this just became clear to me. But the policy was actually started under Clinton. There's the idea that they would call it, I forget what the actual term was, the Clinton administration's policy, but it was thought that people will stop coming over the border if you make it really hard to cross. So they'll fortify and intensify the borders along the cities, El Paso, Brownsville, etc., Nogales. And they'll push migration patterns out into the desert where it's most dangerous, thinking basically the desert is a wall. People, certainly they don't want to die, and so they'll cross. But if you've ever read any accounts of anybody who's crossed the border, nobody will, that's not going to stop anybody. So even the Clinton administration said, we prefer people to die. And evidence of the success of the program was the number of migrant deaths. And again, this is a Democratic government. So it's not that the Democrats are innocent of the sin. Anyway, and it intensified under Obama, but now with Trump, it's really, I think at least, crossed over into sadism and cruelty. Cruelty for cruelty's sake. Well, not just cruelty's sake. Fear. It's the same thing, or it's not the same, but it's very similar to lynching. Lynching is a public spectacle. It's meant to instill fear. The torture that's currently being perpetrated by our representatives at the border, I can only testify to what I've seen in El Paso, it is meant to strike terror into the hearts of people who are just seeking safety.
Could you speak to what you call torture?
Yeah, I mean, would I call it torture? I guess I'd call it harsh treatment. I mean, I guess I've read tons of accounts. I would recommend Francisco Pantu's his book on the border. He's a former Border Patrol agent. But what we saw with the asylum seekers that crossed, there were 15 people. There were 3 families, so kids as young as 8 months old, infants. I can explain in greater depth, but basically we crossed over. There was a kind of standoff on the bridge. And then they did agree to process the claims because we had media on that, because there were activists and everything, and people were being very quiet and nonviolent, but forceful and insistent. So when people were taken into custody, the 15 people, the families, you heard immediately Customs and Border Protection. They took them into a side room, what they call the hieleras, what's it good, like the yeah. As well as the name that they give to the holding cells along the border. So at each, they call it point of entry, there is a jail, essentially a prison, it's a tiny one. And they keep the air conditioning on full blast. So it's just to make people uncomfortable, just to humiliate them even further. And so all I was able to see, because again, we were crossing back with our passports and everything, was so they were being yelled at, they were being told that they had to take off their shoes and their shoelaces, they had to submit to a strip search. These are kids who are like 8 years old. And you're like, is this necessary? And this is just, again, I wasn't able to see that much of it, but we go this way with our passports, they go that way. And so, I mean, yeah, like what would kids do? They're going to start crying. They're being shouted instructions. I mean, it's like, it's bad. That's what I saw. That's not much. I mean, I didn't really see much. You can read more accounts of people being strip searched, sodomized, things like that. This all happens. I can recommend articles if people are interested. But the cruelty that happens, Francisco Cantu, I don't want the title of the book is escaping me. What is it called? The Line Becomes a River. And he's interesting too, Cantu, because he's got a Catholic background. He does this whole thing with Francis of Assisi. And he's not first generation Mexican American, but he has Mexican heritage. But he talks about the way that working for the border, he's a border patrol agent, which is slightly different than Customs and Border Protection, but both under the Department of Homeland Security. The way that it kind of sets you up for sadism, working in such a militarized system. That is, the sin is structural. It's not that all Border Patrol agents are sadists. In fact, many of them are Hispanic. It's one of the only ways in the borderlands towards a middle-class path of existence, and it's an easy way. But people get caught up, I guess, it's the same thing that Sykes is saying. They say, well, those people over there, there's always the other, those people are somehow different from me. They don't count. Non valid. And that's the whole thing. It's just very simple what Bishop Sykes says. Is you just go, no, they do have value. They are human. So, yeah, I mean, what would I say? I would say that I'm not comfortable, or I'm not sure what actually happened to the families that were taken into detention. But they were supposed to be released within 2 to 3 days. That's the time for processing an asylum claim for a Mexican national. And we kept calling and calling our contacts at the Border Institute, and I still don't know where they are. This was like 2 months ago. So were they released to the Catholic house where they were supposed to be? No. Nobody has any idea where they are. Where are they? I don't know. They were people that were as close, that we prayed with them and everything. These are legal asylum seekers who have a claim to be here. And they're here somewhere, but they're in administrative limbo. And this happens. People spend months in detention.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to see how that process, that it's so systematic that every point of contact is a way to dehumanize.
Yeah.
The asylum seekers.
I think so. I mean,
like every step along the way.
So yeah, there was a theologian. His name is Arturo Banuelas. He's a priest of the Diocese of El Paso. And he gave a talk about the border wall and what it is, and it's essentially a monument to white supremacy. That was his phrase. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't secure the border. And it's just meant to say, if you go and look at it visually even, it's just meant to intimidate. It's meant to say, those people over there are so poor, so violent, so sick, so diseased, that we need this really scary wall. I mean, I'm not being flippant. Like, watch Lord of the Rings, the walls there are less scary. It's just so ugly. It just cuts through the land. And that's not the social reality of the borderlands. I don't know if you picked up on this, but Sykes talks about borderlands culture as a specific amalgam of different cultures. There's indigenous cultures, there's Hispanic cultures, there's English-speaking cultures, all kind of blended into this one thing. And this was something, I'm from Philadelphia, so I don't know anything about the borderlands, but what I was so fascinated by was that the border is porous. There's this line that Sykes has where he says, we didn't cross the border, this is what people in the borderlands say, the border crossed us.
Hi. We've begun talking about, asking us about white supremacy.
Yeah.
And this is fascinating, needless to say. But I know you were going to pull out from us a lot about, and I just don't want the evening to end without that.
Sure. Yeah. I'll stop talking.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
It kind of reminds me of conversations I've had with my kids a little bit, where they're like, it's nice to think that everybody can just, come into America. There's no border. That's kind of the ideal world. Everybody, there's no borders. Imagine a world. Do you think that there needs to be? You said, do you think there needs to be some kind of border? Do you think that anybody? It's almost the question my kids ask me. Like, do you think anybody should just be able to come into America with no problem and not have a border in a way?
I guess I would start answer. First of all, I guess I'll say I don't know. It's a really complicated question. But I would say that certainly, and much of the global south. So when people are fleeing El Salvador, Ecuador, all of these countries, again, it's a shame Milton's not able to be here. He has another commitment on Monday nights. But I'm sure you won't mind if I share, his parents brought him over across the border as well with, fake papers, and they hired a coyote. And it's a trauma that he's still processing. But it's one, and this is the sin of racism, is one that we bear responsibility for as a society and as white people. That's something that I've come to understand, at least, as I read it. There's a writer named Weal NYC, she teaches creative writing or creative nonfiction at Northwestern University in Chicago. And she wrote this essay in the New York Times Magazine a number of years ago called White Debt. And she says that, well, what's it like to be white in America? It's like living in a house that you didn't pay for, or that other people paid for. That is to say, America, again, I recommend the New York Times 1619 Project, which kind of gets at this, but America is founded on racism. The wealth that was generated, prior to the Civil War, the entire economy of the southern part of the United States was predicated on racism. And that's debt that we haven't paid off. That's what Ta-Nehisi Coates is trying to get Congress to understand. It's what Mitch McConnell pushed back against. The argument, again, I'm just saying what I think. Again, this is just me thinking. It's not official or anything. But I agree with this when she says that, it's like, what does it mean to be in debt if you have a mortgage? You're living in a house that you own, but you don't really own it. We who are white and well off are living in, we're living with all of this wealth, but we don't really own it. It really is.
Maybe to get the other people speaking, the word around, and I'd just say something quick. I mean, my interpretation is, as a white person, is just to be. I would say to be more conscious and to try to do things that help people. And I'm working on a lot of things, like a social impact company that has inner city women able to teach Brazilian, create economic opportunity. I don't feel like though I should feel like guilty that I'm white, feel bad about it, like I was born, but I want to help people. I think there is this recognition that we should all be, and just as Christians and as people in the world, we should try to be creating equal opportunity and living to our country's values, and be conscious of helping people, especially people that have had a hard time, many for reasons because of past injustices. But I don't know, I just have a hard time personally feeling like I should feel really bad about and guilty about
feeling bad.
because I think that's there's a lot of that kind of emotion, and it's not comfortable for everybody. I don't think it's constructive.
But I do think that's, and I think to get back to sites, I think he's very clear in saying we should sit with our sin for a bit. We actually should allow ourselves to feel pretty bad about what we've done and profited from. So I don't want to skip that step. I think
you be aware, just like the Germans about the Holocaust. I've been reading about India and English in India. There's a recognition, I guess, of what has happened.
I think it's interesting that cites that he titles "At Night Will Be No More." This quote from the Book of Revelation is that in order for the light to emerge, you really have to be aware of the darkness. And I think that's what he's trying to say, is that we need to. What happened in Paso on August 3rd ought to wake us up. The fact that 22 majority Hispanic people were gunned down by a white supremacist, it also said, okay, this is part of a pattern.
Could I ask a question? Do you have any printed copy of this? We're talking about what the bishop said over and over again. We should be able to at least look at it too.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We do have it.
Put it on our website.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you. It's on our website.
Oh, it's on the website. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I got it.
I think that what you were saying about feeling guilty, I think what we're here now to try and understand is the system in which we live. Not that we did it. We weren't bad people who did it. But we live in a system that has all these resources because the system has built so that we get it and they don't. So I think that's what we're here to kind of understand a little bit more.
And I would just add one thing to that, is that this statement by Seitz is saying we are Christians, we are trying to act like Christ. So what is it that we do in that situation? And we're living in a world of complete transformation now. Refugees are all over. They're coming at us everywhere. and the question for us who are secure and have what we need, how are we going to be Christ in that and share that? That's the deeper question. And I guess I would like to hear from other people's questions or why they came tonight to come here. You were
Were you on?
Well, I do always kind of, why is it just this one bishop speaking out? I feel that these more and more atrocities at the border, children dying, horrible conditions, children who came to New York, the Cabrini Coalition at this own parish was working to help with this situation. Why aren't all the bishops really speaking out against it? And I feel that our own cardinal has never spoken out. We have many, many Latino parishioners across the 5 boroughs. What are we really doing? Everyone should be really up in arms about this issue. These are our fellow parishioners, and we only hear from an occasional bishop. Why aren't we hearing from every single bishop in this country against this issue, and why aren't we, as all these parishioners, speaking out against this? It's one thing after the other. Every day I read the paper, there's yet another thing they're doing to make things worse for people. And I just feel like, why aren't we welcoming the immigrant? Why aren't we, as a Catholic community, from the top down, really advocating for this? And I feel like we haven't really done this in the city.
I can speak for sites. I know that's part of it. Does it matter? Do people still hear me if I don't use it? I do. Yeah, okay. I'm going to turn it off. I think they haven't, I mean, this is a hard question that I struggle with. What would it take to get them to release a statement? Instead of saying, well, abortion is our preeminent priority, which they just did at their November meeting. We care equally about right to life issues involving the border. But they didn't. And I think that's partly because not all of them had the experience of Bishop Sykes, his own personal journey of conversion, which began in the years.
I can't believe when we have 50% of the population in the 5 boroughs being Latino that we don't have experience in this diocese. That makes no sense to me.
But the people who have the experience are not in the positions of power. I guess that's partly it too. Bishop Sykes has power.
That's what the white privilege is all about.
And I think it's also the other thing that you said about Border Patrol agents. So just to give some background, I used to live in El Paso.
Yeah.
So I went to school there. My dad lived there. And like you're saying, so just to give people a bit of an image, you drive down the freeway and on one side you see the university, which is like a beautiful campus, and on the other side you see Anapra, which is one of the most one of the poorest parts of Mexico, if not the world. Some parts of Anapra doesn't have plumbing or other things that we take for granted. But going back to the Border Patrol agents, they are in this system. They're probably second, third generation. They forget where they come from. Most don't have. They reject the Hispanic culture. They don't want to speak Spanish. They don't want to be associated with being Latino, which is very sad, and it's a problem that's also from within and cultural. It's not just the U.S. government doing that. It's a broader problem.
It's partly a spiritual thing too. Like it's to say, well, I need to escape the negative. It's taking in, I mean, the critical race theory would say, it's taking on the idea of the oppressor and saying, oh, well, I really am as bad as you say that I am. I deserve to be lower. It's rejecting that. But I think what Sykes is trying to say, this is why Guadalupe is so important. What happens with that apparition is the Virgin of Guadalupe says to Juan Diego, you have value. You know, an indigenous person who doesn't count at all in the Spanish Empire, you have value. There's an inversion that happens. It's actually the people who are lowest and poorest, they're really the most Christ. That point in El Paso where you're talking about, we drove past it, and a resident of El Paso said to me, look at this shining city on a hill, how beautiful it is. It inspires the people on the other side of the border to raise themselves up. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's racism. Like, and so should the person on the other side say, oh, yes, I really am that low because you positioned me that way? No, sorry, it gets me so angry just because there were people at this teach-in saying, well, I don't think that, I think it's discriminatory to say that they're African Americans and that Latinos exist. We're all one. We're all universal. That doesn't work either. I think there's a lot of, the way racism works is it's like any kind of lie, any kind of abusive lie. It says, maybe I really am as bad as you say that I am. Not true.
But I think to your point and to yours, people in powerful positions should be reminding parishioners, should be reminding people that we need to do something, not just sit down and see what happens.
Yeah. No, there's a sense of urgency now. I think, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a bishop, so I have no idea what it's like. But I guess this is also what I see sites saying, is there's nothing to be afraid of. He quotes that poet Esquivel. What can they do but threaten us with resurrection? Like, what are they going to do? Kill us? Let them just resurrect. There's no reason to be afraid, as they're saying. I don't know.
I mean, there are some grassroots efforts, just to do a quick, I don't know if you're familiar with the Cabrini Coalition, but just to put that on the map if people haven't heard of it. It's a group of several churches, St. Francis de Sales, Father Kelly is a really amazing leader within the church in our coalition. Rick Church, which I'm part of on 91st and Park, and very long history, which Ruben Nunez, the pastor of Church of Living Hope, spoke at Rick Church about on Sunday, kind of educated members that came before service about involvement in East Harlem. But our, the view we're putting together, just kind of trying to bridge for mutual enrichment and humanity and helping immigrants and helping the people in need in East Harlem. We're trying to engage, but in a way that's not like we're coming in to fix things. We just want to have, food on the table, la mesa, and get to know how we can help people and sort of building that connectivity, more connectivity between the neighborhoods, more understanding and awareness of really how we can enhance the humanity, the souls of everybody on both sides of different regions coming together. But so maybe, as I hear, hopefully leaders will recognize, especially Christian leaders, that in the spirit of Christ, to help people and to look for those that are not as needy and do things to make it easier and help people, and that will happen more. If not, there's more and more of a need for kind of grassroots, people coming together across different churches and figuring out how to bridge communities and make a difference. That's what we're doing at the Cabrini Coalition.
So is the letter just about white versus Hispanic? Because if you live outside the United States, there are castes within castes. Like you go to Guatemala, the local Guatemalans treat the indigenous people like garbage. So I mean, like it's a caste system. It's not a white thing. India, Middle East.
Yeah.
I mean, Middle Easterns treat the Pakistanis and the Indians like garbage.
Yeah.
It's almost embarrassing.
Unfortunately, it's human nature. No, it's a human nature.
It's human nature. It's like we're
for years,
Romans,
everybody. Yeah, I mean,
right.
But I think I do want to I think CITES is calling attention to a particularly pernicious form of racism, which is white supremacy. It's about the U.S. with respect to its neighbors and with respect to people who are living inside of the United States. So African American, anybody who's not white, and he says this, whiteness is normative. This obsession with purity, this obsession with, it's a kind of Anglo-European thing. This is what he's condemning. He's saying the United States can no longer afford to think of itself as normatively white, because it's not. What is the United States? Is it just, I mean, I'm from Philadelphia, that's where we signed the Declaration of Independence. But we weren't the first European people living in the United States. That was in California. There were Spanish settlers. So it's like there's there's nobody can make any claims to supremacy, but it's the white people that keep making the claims. And that's what he's so incensed about. And where it happens, why does it happen on the border? Because that's the most visible point of demarcation between the two races, between people of Hispanic origin and people, white people.
It's interesting though you say a lot of Hispanics are part of that system too, which to your point, it's not like it just feels like it's not just about being whiteness. It's about structural inequalities, structural systems that get set up, trying to protect, have borders where, again, you're trying to keep some kind of a border, and then people get in the way. Like even the DMV, you go there and you often don't feel as badly treated, but just institutions are not capable sometimes of being very compassionate and giving service. But I don't know. I'm just saying.
I look at what you're saying with India and Guatemala, whatever, and you go back far enough. What is the white European influence on that? You can't separate that from colonization, be it India or any place else. So when you talk about the Spanish influence in Guatemala, what is that influence of being white Spanish as compared to mixed with indigenous people? See, it keeps going back. So white supremacy, I mean, we could throw it off, but I think there is a real validity to, if we look back historically, how that happened. And if we look uniquely in this country, we could go back even further. I mean, I'm sure there are other immigrants we could speak of, but three in particular, Irish, Italian, and Jewish. If you look back in the old New York Times, and the old newspapers, when the Irish first came over, and it was ludicrous, blue eyes, blonde hair, light skin, they were referred to as inside-out Negroes. So there was still an attachment to being black, to keep Irish down. They weren't quite white. How did Irish buy into America? By convincing, no, we are white. We are not that. Italians, when Italians first came over, we were called all of the same horrible references that were used to Michelle Obama. We were referred to as monkeys, we were referred to as apes. But what did Italians do? Italians, rather than saying, okay, maybe we're not white, unfortunately we bought into it and said, no, we are not that. Jews did the same thing. You could go back and look in all of the old magazines and newspapers. What population could not do that? What population could not deny their blackness? And that is the population that continued to be marginalized in the United States.
And it was the Chinese that actually caused us to change the laws.
There's caste within caste. I mean, I say it's a black and white issue. As a matter of fact, my mother was Irish Catholic, and my grandmother wouldn't go to the mass or the marriage because she was Irish Catholic. So we're not talking that long ago. We're not talking more ancient history. We're talking like my parents. But I don't understand because once again, my father's side was Scottish. They were immigrants, and my mother's side was here in the country for generations, was Irish Catholic, and they looked down upon them because back in the old country, the Scots looked down upon the Irish. So it's complex, sort of like.
I'm not arguing your point that human nature is to always look at caste systems in all kinds of ways, religion, gender. We could talk about men and women. We could talk about all kinds of different issues. But this is an ugly part of the way human nature has interpreted those caste systems through white supremacy. Not saying it's the only way, but it's a big way, and it's a predominant way of how we use the system here in the United States.
Let's talk about economics, as we're saying. Most of these guys are doing these horrible things.
And it's raging right now.
Well, they're like a lower white, they see themselves more or less as competing for the same jobs as these people coming over, taking my jobs away. So there's that anger that Trump is tapping into that says those people are taking your jobs. That's why you're not succeeding as a white person in America, is because those people are keeping you down. So I mean, I say it's not like white on Hispanic. It's almost like they're competing for the same jobs. It's always been that way. It's always like those people are taking my jobs. Those people keep taking food from I'm not failing. They're causing me to fail.
Yeah, I mean Hitler used that, saying that the Jewish people were undermining German, industry.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an age-old argument, I'm sure, and people, there obviously are economic, it's obviously used as a...
The only thing we have to be careful of, when we do things like age-old, it's kind of like, it almost waters everything down, and it doesn't give us a point to work from, to act on, because when we reduce everything to human nature, then it just becomes, well, this is the way it is, and it always has been. People just work against each other. So there's a danger in that.
It's very simple the way Sykes puts it. He says, this mystery of evil, this is page 9, if you have it, part 1, point 12. This mystery of evil also includes the base belief that some of us are more important, deserving, and worthy than others. It includes the ugly conviction that this country, meaning the U.S., and its history and opportunities and resources, as well as our economic and political life, belong more properly to white people than to people of color. This is a perverse way of thinking that divides people based on heritage and tone of skin into us and them, worthy and unworthy, paving the way to dehumanization. In other words, racism. I think it just has to be admitted.
I mean, it's clearly a problem. I don't think anybody would argue that that's not a problem, that there's a lot of people who think that, and that's causing a lot of trouble and are really behind what they should be in the world. Unfortunately, that's a reality that hopefully can change. How do you change that? You know?
I think for the room that we're sitting in, we've had a lot of conversation over the last year or so about topics like this, and we've been very lucky to be able to talk about that. I think the thing that constantly or continues to surprise me, and I know I shouldn't be depressed or feel guilty about it, but that the church has been complicit in all of this for hundreds of years is a new awareness, as of this last year or so, is a new awareness for me. And I don't know what to do with that. And I'm appreciative that we're sitting here, and I wonder if anybody else feels like that, or Mary, you were saying, you know, the bishops aren't saying anything. I agree. I'm frustrated. You asked Griffin how we felt about hearing the phrase white supremacy. I'm more than guilty, I'm frustrated. And I want us to be better. And I don't, whatever happened, now we have to do something about it. And this example of the situation at the border is an impetus for us to talk about it again and figure out, how do we be better?
Well, the Catholic means universal, so we're supposed to be accepting everyone, and these are the primary social teachings that everyone is created by God and is worthy no matter where they're from. So why are we need to really make that a priority for us to make sure that everyone has the ability to, seek asylum. It's not like they're Mexican, they're different than us. We're all part of the human family, and that's what's frustrating and why we aren't speaking out over and over to make that difficult.
I mean, it makes me think of the civil rights movement, of course, right? I mean, where people did really make a difference. Some churches galvanized and got really involved and went down to the South and certain brave and progressive and people did. It sounds like, what I'm hearing is a lot of people saying, like, there should be more talk about it, more action. I'm not in the Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic, so but I'm curious what others think. Especially people who are involved in leadership positions in the Catholic Church.
Talk about doing something positive and small, and not in a condescending way or patriarchal or beneficent, that we're going to do this for you because yes, you struggle.
Right.
More, this is our responsibility because we have what we have, and because what's interesting is that some of the most positive and long-lasting small steps that I'm aware of, because my daughter's having gone through public school in New York, a lot of our, if not most, of our social friends happen to be Jewish, and they're secular Jews, so they are not necessarily And a lot of them don't believe in an afterlife, so they're going to do their darndest to make a difference here, because that's their legacy. And several of them have, as totally secular, one child's become a rabbi, several of the kids who were not bar and bar mitzvah, the daughters, are now in synagogues at Case Western. And in about 5 cases, they are involved in very, I guess, reform or whatever, synagogues, where they're all coming together and they're sponsoring families. And finding, now is it easier in Cleveland or out in LA or ones in Dallas? Is it easier to do than it is here? But the congregation is coming together. They're helping them get schools for the kids. They're helping them job training, outfitting homes.
Doing little things.
You know, so I would love to think that the real driver is a belief, a Christian belief in doing for others. But there are a lot of models that are secular, but that go to your point, sir, of taking concrete steps. I mean, you know, we could do semiotic analysis and the white supremacists and look at people being upset about the canon in universities all across the country. You know, that they're reading Persian literature or the I Ching and they're not reading Moby Dick. Is that racism? Well, it's probably a fear that the Western canon has a superiority and that people aren't getting it. So we could talk about that. But maybe we should also be looking at, inspired by Seitz's letter, about concrete steps. And again, not in a we're better, but where we have what we have, could, through Cabrini, whatever, could we come together and could there be, it used to be, there's a group called HIAS, and it used to deal, it's Jewish, and it used to deal only with Jewish immigrants, and now they're resettling immigrants from Africa, and they're resettling, it isn't, they've gone bigger than that, and they have job training programs, and they also have legislative people who go in and lobby, so they are trying to change policy, but they are taking these, you know, Christopher one step at a time. So I talk too much, but that would make me feel that whether it's churches or churches in the mosque or churches in Park Avenue.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. They say talk is cheap, right? It's like, what are people wanting to do?
Well, that's one thing.
I guess I wanted to say, I thought about this for myself. It's something that my colleague kept using the word convicted. We were at the border feeling very convicted as white people. And I'm not saying this is anybody's motivation, but there's this, like, it's intolerable, the situation. So what can we do? But I think that the Christian tradition, the Catholic tradition, has resources beyond action, at least immediate action. Namely, I found that as a white person, like, my job is to listen, like, to my colleagues who are people of color. Like, that's in the most immediate sense. Like, I'm talking now, but I shouldn't be talking. Like, that's what they advised us to do. Marisa Limon was, she works at a border institute, but she was kind of one of the leaders from the Latinx Leadership Coalition. She said, telling people what, so we leave this conference and what do we do? Because you're going to want to do something, and you're going to want to organize, etc. But for those of us who are white, maybe open up a space. Like, maybe, like, don't worry about taking the lead and having a bunch of projects. Like, just listen. Like, and I go back to the Benedictine tradition, which begins with the word listen. So listen, O Son, the words of the Master. Like, I think that there needs to be in all of this a contemplative dimension. Like, it's a spiritual problem, racism. And of course it has structural ramifications, but I kind of think, like, I mean, I'm so sorry Milton's not here, but I've learned so much from him, just from him telling me, it sounds like a cliche, telling me his experience. but actually watching him struggle with the trauma of racism. And so my concern is, how can I be in my immediate, just in my job, like how can I support this person? I can just listen and like give a hand when he needs it, but it's really not much more. It's really as basic as just be a Christian. Like, try to efface yourself. Like, try to put others first, and just do it. Like that's not an answer for everybody. I'm just saying how like where I'm at with all of this internally is, yes, everything is bad. But like, I don't know, it's like night will be no more. Not to make it easy, but like the Feast of Guadalupe. I love how Bishop Seitz talks about this as this explosion of light, right? Like he talks about the dance and he talks about the liturgical festivities, and he says the ground shakes. And that was something we got to see in El Paso. And it was something that I perceived as we went across the bridge also, just the way that it was happening, like the colors in the sky and everything. I sense very much like the presence of Our Lady of Guadalupe, bringing me into this reality of saying everybody counts. Like that's it. There's no, that's just it. If everybody counts, why am I as a white person counting more in some of these situations? It shouldn't be like that. I should step back.
So I would like to talk actually after what you say about the caste system and about all those kind of things. I am ethnically Kurdish from Turkey. So we have such a thing called Turkish supremacy. Like back in the 90s there were Turkish scientists in the Turkish TV channel that they claim since Kurds they live on mostly on the mountains, they didn't evolve yet, so we have still things. So, same old story everywhere.
Yeah.
But the thing is that beyond the feeling of guilt, I believe there should be material demands for the communities that they are either racially vulnerable or economically or socially vulnerable. Let's say for today, if we count most of immigrants of this country today are composed of Latin American people, it should be that all those immigrants, that should be demanded that all those immigrants should have right to access fully to education, healthcare services, like a U.S. citizen. And to be honest with you, United States is the biggest country that they have source of that. It's like literally they remove all their military assets from just Afghanistan, let's say, from Iraq or somewhere else. It's one thing. Another thing, when we talk about like here the black question here, for example, we refer to, but like today in the United States legal system, there was an article in ProPublica that a white kid and a black kid, they were charged, like they were being judged for the same exact crime. Actually, the white kid, he robbed a bar, pardon me. Then the black kid stole some food, and this black kid gets 5 years, the white kid gets 1 year or something like that. So in the US justice legal system, one of my friends will take on quantitative research methods and he knows how algorithm works. Those algorithm input lots of different stuff, including racial category and including your zip code. So at the end of the day, it results with the like, okay, black is again guilty. So
there's a lot of systematic issues across many aspects.
Material need here is that like literally, like how you say, revise a justice system. The justice system provides the justice.
Right, it's fair. It's fair. And that's the same rules.
Or like reparations for those neighborhoods, or those kind of things. I mean, those are the beyond the guilt. I believe that those are the actual material acknowledgement of make the community like empower them, and empowering them make also white communities and other like whatever color communities make them also peaceful. Because the thing is that if I have anger, if my kids, I'm gonna see that they are gonna cry because of the hunger, I'm gonna steal food from some houses. I don't care about that. I mean, at the end of the day. I mean, same thing, for this reason, I'm referring to that caste system, because like, I worked in Syrian, Kurdish, and Arab refugee camps also. Mm-hmm. And the same situation with the Hispanics here, and you see the same Turkish supremacists in the street, especially from the much more wealthy classes, that they have talking in a way that they have a pink-washed world. And of course, I'm aware of that, like there are poor whites in this country.
Yes.
And they are not that much white for some others. So, like, what is whiteness? Well, it's a long issue, but the real thing is that what you can do practically is that, literally, yes, political demands is right over there, but on the other hand, the community empowerment, I think, legally and economically, it's the, I think, a thing that churches here, that churches who wants to take initiative, they want to do, they can do that.
I think one of the things that I'm curious, maybe we can kind of go back to, is I think while we can all kind of sit in the woes of the task in front of us, I thought one of the interesting things about the letter is that actually it's very much steeped in hope, and how making us acknowledge that like what we think is the natural order of things, that we want to rank things, it's actually a form of racism that habits our imagination and our will to do things. But Bishop Seitz doesn't let us stop there. He says, like, actually, since this is a spiritual ill, like this is a spiritual ill we all carry on some very personal level, because of the systemic way that it's come into our lives. It almost requires a spiritual solution. So yeah, I really enjoyed a bit more of the Guadalupe as a model for that, of remembering to restore dignity in people, and for like you had said, on just even a very personal level, trying to think of ways you can introduce that back into our lives. But also, one of the ones that stuck with me too is that Bishop Seitz also mentioned that it's also a process of humility and friendship. So I don't know, I think that's kind of a thing I'm curious about, maybe kind of expand this out and everything, of like where do we spiritually need help, and thinking about this for ourselves, or how to wrestle with the frustrations as Jane has talked about.
A few things we can do, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Griffin, about listening, I think is getting involved with the immigrant communities. So, for example, we've mentioned Guadalupe a few times. We have an amazing procession that's going to take place on Wednesday, starting at 6 at Church of the Living Hope on 104th. We're going to have a celebration here until midnight, then we're going to have a Mass on Thursday at 6. And it's going to be a Spanish Mass. That might be uncomfortable for non-Spanish speakers, but I think the spirituality of it is going to be amazing. And the amount of planning that our Grupo Hispano is putting into this, we should be very proud of what they're doing, and we very easily can show our support just by attending and coming together. Our Cabrini Coalition, we were talking earlier about perhaps marching in the Three Kings Day parade that the Museo del Barrio organizes at the beginning of the year. So those are very practical ways to start, to spiritually grow alongside our immigrant brothers and sisters.
Amen.
Yeah. I think again, to that point, when we find ways where we can find these kinds of groups, I mentioned grassroots, and Lydia kind of, I'm glad she talked more about Cabrini, but I think we kind of need to find ways that we can work together, because it's not like one person can do too much on their own. There needs to be kind of forums and groups for making a positive difference and doing things. And again, a lot of what we're doing right now is not trying to be prescriptive and be like, we're going to come do this, that, and X, Y, and Z for you, but just like getting involved in the communities to learn, to listen, and learn and be engaged in positive ways. I wonder if, I don't want to put Father Kelly on the spot too much, but I've come to know him and respect him, and he's very wise and very involved in some of these these things. Very thoughtful, and I just wonder if you have any words as you've heard this all that you can share with us, because I know your words would have wisdom.
Appreciate that. You know, I would just write off of what you're saying, and I think all these are great efforts, but I think, you know, right now we're all a little concerned that we don't hear more of a voice of the United States bishops. And yet, there are a number of them besides Seitz who are speaking up. McElroy and McElroy in San Diego, Tobin in Newark. And, you know, it was amazing to me, we didn't know that we had posted on our own site the letter, the pastoral letter. We're not even aware of what goes on in our own parish. So I think we need to contextualize this a little bit. Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of New York is doing fantastic work in terms of advocacy and hands-on accompaniment for our immigrant brothers and sisters as we speak. So that's important. But I think we also have this great example of probably what we would consider the central figure of the Catholic Church, Francis, who is not a matter of either or. He's not saying it has to be action over contemplation, but both have to be communicated. And one of the things we want to do, and you mentioned that, and we're not comfortable with this, especially as Americans, as Seitz says, is sit with the sin. Sit with the sin. I don't sit with the sin. It's not my sin. Let me get rid of it. Sit with the sin. We've profited by it. We enter into it in the systems that we live and work and have our being in. And we have to begin to examine. We have a great practice, spiritual practice, in the Catholic Church called an examination of conscience, where we look at our lives, not only the bad things, the good things also, but we examine where is God in this, and where is God not in this. So in my own sense of superiority, in my own sense of wanting to hoard things, to create safe borders around myself, how have I contributed to this? And if you're not uncomfortable, you should be uncomfortable. All of us should be uncomfortable, because we've all participated and benefited from it. You know, good point. It's not my wisdom. We begin every liturgy in two ways. We begin by welcoming everybody in the name of the triune God, and then we begin by asking everybody to sit with their sinfulness for a moment, so that we enter into the liturgy with a clean heart. And we trust, and this is, Francis has been paramount in this in his papacy, we trust in God's mercy. You know, but you can't get to one without the other. If I'm going to ask for mercy, I have to recognize there's a reason I'm asking for mercy. And that's been my own complicity and my own sinfulness. And if it stays just in mea culpa, maxima culpa, then that becomes a kind of sick guiltiness. But if that then propels us to action, then it's been good discernment. But we can't rush through it. We can't rush through it, and we want to do that. And I recognize, trust me, and I want to do the same things. We want to clean up everything right away. But some of the benefits of sitting with it, as Bishop Seitz says, will be to see and root it out in our own lives. Because personal holiness will then contribute to communal holiness as the body of Christ, you know. And I think he's just done a fantastic job in naming the sin and asking us all to spend some time with it, not in some sort of pathological, sick way, but in a way that can kind of bring healing. You know, so that would be my 2 cents on that.
Thanks for sharing that.
I feel like, I guess I don't really have anything. I guess just from my own experience, like it's going to be okay. It's kind of the thing to say. Like, and I think that's what Francis is. Francis is always saying that migrants and refugees are paradigmatic of the church as a whole. Where we all need to be is, so you say it so many times, it sounds like a cliche, but at the margins, like, so El Paso is at the margins of the U.S. But I guess, and you're from there, so you would know better than me, but like, I don't know, I feel like the future is there. Like, actually, all of us are being evangelized by what's happening there in the desert, by what Sites is doing. So he's just witnessing what he's seeing. So there's kind of, I don't know, there's a kind of hope in that somewhere. Like,
well, I think Lydia was saying it, and you were saying it. Just spend some time over the next couple of days with some of our Mexican brothers and sisters, and you will see hope. You know, people who are doing jobs that nobody else wants to do will be leaving work, buying roses, and crowding churches all over the city to pay homage to, as they call her, La Morenita, the dark one, their mother. And there's a great joy in that. Yesterday when we sat with the leadership, the Guadalupanos, who were planning the celebration, we said to them, make sure to have some folks here that are bilingual so that they can explain to people who are not Spanish speaking what the customs are, the dance, the prayers, and so on and so forth. They lit up and they basically said, Father, they're interested? I said, they're very interested. So make sure that you'll be able to, you know, have folks that can communicate with them and let them know what your customs are and why you do them. So, you know, that's, as you were let us off, that's the Church of the United States. That's our hope. Out of the peripheries is really coming the evangelization and the new church. So that joy is going to be very palpable in this city. Just go to try to buy a rose someplace, and they'll all be sold out in the next couple of days.
That's a great way of looking at it. And just the fact, you know, there's always the negative, and there's the work to be done, there's the positive, but there's a lot of goodness that's going on as well that one can tap into and be inspired, is what I'm hearing you say a little bit. The fact is that there are so many people who have, you know, there are a lot of people who have come and people have really made efforts to help people and made more of that happen. But there's certainly a lot of good people, and a lot of people have come, and again, may there be more, you know, more of that to come.
I want to